Life sometimes brings unexpected turns, especially when we think we know the people around us. This story is about Lorelei, a successful 71-year-old businesswoman who has just sold her company for $21 million. In a moment of celebration, she notices something disturbing: her daughter-in-law putting an unknown substance into her wine. Instead of reacting immediately, Lorelei decides to investigate the situation, which leads her to a shocking discovery. Her daughter-in-law is not who she claims to be. This is a story about betrayal, courage, and wisdom that comes with age, but also about strength of character that teaches us it's never too late for new life lessons. Before we begin this thrilling story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. My name is Lorelei Thornfield. At 71, I still take pride in my energy and sharp mind. Many urged me to retire from the business world, but I always said that work is what keeps me young. Still, after more than 4 decades of running a successful biotechnology company that I built from scratch, I decided it was time for a new phase in life. The negotiations for selling my company lasted months. When the final offer of $21 million arrived, I knew it was more than a fair price. It wasn't just about the money. I knew the buyer shared my values and would continue to care for the employees who had been like my second family. The day of signing the contract was both sad and exciting. I felt nostalgic as I walked through the laboratories and offices for the last time as the owner, greeting people who had been with me for years. My son Maxwell stood beside me, squeezing my hand at key moments. On his face, I saw pride, but also concern for me. "Mom, are you sure this is what you want?" he asked quietly as we waited for the lawyers to prepare the final papers. "Never more certain," I replied with a smile. "It's time to enjoy life, to travel, read all those books I've been putting off for years, spend more time with my grandchildren." Maxwell nodded, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. My son, always worried about me, especially after my husband Edward passed away 5 years ago. Maxwell had taken on the role of protector, sometimes forgetting that I was still the strong woman who had built a successful company in a time when it wasn't easy for women in the business world. After the signing, I decided to organize a grand celebration, not just for business partners and employees, but for family and friends who had supported me throughout all these years. I wanted it to be an elegant evening in the garden of my mansion in the Hamptons, with a view of the sunset, excellent food, and, of course, the finest wine from my cellar. I fussed over every detail, from flowers to music, from the menu to the seating arrangement. Perhaps it was my need to show my organizational ability one more time, or simply a desire to create a perfect memory for all of us. The evening of the celebration arrived faster than I expected. The garden was beautifully decorated with lights hanging from oak trees, tables elegantly set, and staff impeccably dressed. Guests began arriving in the early evening hours. First business partners, then employees, and finally family and close friends. Maxwell arrived with his wife Lydia. The two had been married for 5 years, but I must admit I never fully understood their relationship. Lydia was 20 years younger than Maxwell, an attractive woman with a mysterious smile and penetrating eyes. They met during his business trip to Prague, and after just 6 months of dating, they decided to get married. Edward was still alive when Lydia entered our lives, and he often told me he had a strange feeling about her. "She's hiding something," he would tell me. "Her smile never reaches her eyes." At the time, I thought it was just his natural protectiveness toward our son. But now, watching Lydia walk through my garden, greeting guests as if she were the hostess, I wondered if my late husband might have been right. "Lorelei, you look beautiful tonight," she said, kissing me on both cheeks. She wore an elegant black dress that perfectly accentuated her slender figure, and her hair was gathered in a sophisticated bun. Always impeccable, always perfectly groomed. "Thank you, Lydia," I replied. "You look beautiful too, as always." Her smile widened a little, but as Edward had noted, it didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, this is your night. You deserve it after all those years of hard work." I nodded, watching as she turned to greet one of my longtime business partners, introducing herself with the ease and charm that were characteristic of her. Lydia always knew how to make an impression on people. Maxwell approached me, placing a protective arm around my shoulders. At 45, my son had inherited his father's tall stature and my determination. His success in his own right as a financial advisor made me proud, though I sometimes worried about his workaholic tendencies. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, his voice low and intimate amid the growing noise of the party. "Wonderfully," I assured him, patting his hand. "This feels right, Maxwell. Seeing everyone together like this. It's a perfect way to close this chapter." He nodded, but I could see the concern lingering in his eyes. "Just promise me you won't get bored in retirement. I know how you are when you don't have a project." I laughed, a genuine burst of amusement. "Oh, I have plenty of projects planned. Just different ones now." As the evening progressed, I mingled with my guests, accepting congratulations and reminiscing about the years gone by. The caterers had outdone themselves, and the champagne flowed freely. It was nearing the time for the toast, the official moment to mark this transition in my life. I made my way to the center of the garden where a small platform had been set up. The string quartet I had hired fell silent as I approached the microphone. From the corner of my eye, I saw the waiters preparing to distribute glasses of champagne for the toast. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. "Each of you has played a part in the journey that brought me here." As I spoke, I noticed Lydia moving toward the table where the special bottle of wine I had selected for my personal toast was placed. It was a rare vintage that Edward and I had bought on our honeymoon in France, saved for a truly momentous occasion. I had mentioned to only a few people that I would be using it for my personal toast rather than the champagne everyone else would drink. Something about Lydia's movements caught my attention. A furtiveness, a quick glance around to see if anyone was watching. And then, with a swift movement that might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been looking directly at her, she removed something from her clutch and tipped it into what I knew was my glass. I faltered mid-sentence, just for a moment, before recovering and continuing my speech. My heart was racing, but decades of business negotiations had taught me to maintain composure in shocking situations. I finished my address, accepted the applause with a smile, and then made my way toward the drinks table as everyone expected. But instead of picking up my glass, I pretended to be distracted by a question from one of the guests. In the ensuing moment of confusion, I managed to slide my wine glass behind a flower arrangement, out of sight. "Lorelei, your toast," someone called out. "One moment," I replied with a laugh. "Let me get a fresh glass. I seem to have misplaced mine." I caught Lydia's eyes across the table. For just an instant, I saw something flash across her face. Alarm, frustration, perhaps even anger, but it was quickly replaced by her usual controlled smile. A waiter brought me a new glass of champagne, not the wine, and I raised it high. "To new beginnings," I proclaimed. "To new beginnings," the crowd echoed. As I sipped the champagne, I felt Lydia's gaze on me, intense and calculating. I knew then that my evening had just become something entirely different from the celebration I had planned. It had become a chess match, and I needed to be very careful about my next move. For the remainder of the evening, I maintained the facade of the happy hostess, laughing and chatting with my guests as if nothing was amiss. But beneath my composed exterior, my mind was racing. What had Lydia put in my wine? And more importantly, why? I noticed that she never strayed far from me for the rest of the night. If I moved to one group of guests, within minutes she would appear nearby, her attention seemingly on her conversation, but her awareness clearly fixed on me. If I headed toward the house, she would find a reason to follow. It was as if she was waiting for something to happen, something that never did, because I hadn't drunk from that glass. Maxwell, absorbed in conversations with old friends and business associates, seemed oblivious to the subtle game being played between his wife and mother. Part of me wanted to pull him aside, to share my suspicions. But what would I say? That I thought his wife had tried to poison me. Without proof, it would sound like the paranoid fantasy of an aging woman. Perhaps even a sign that I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. No, I needed evidence before I said anything to anyone. Around midnight, as the party began to wind down, Maxwell approached me, Lydia by his side. "Mom, we're thinking of heading home. Are you sure you'll be all right by yourself tonight? You've had a big day." I smiled reassuringly. "I'll be fine, dear. Mrs. Pembroke will be here." Mrs. Pembroke had been my housekeeper for over 20 years. A steady, reliable presence in my home. "If you're sure," Maxwell still looked concerned. "Absolutely sure. Go home, get some rest." Lydia's arm was linked through Maxwell's, her body language casual, but her eyes watchful. "It was a lovely party, Lorelei. Thank you for including everyone in your celebration." "Of course," I replied, matching her light tone. Family is everything, isn't it? Something flickered in her expression at my emphasis on family, but she recovered quickly. Indeed it is. Good night, then. I watched them leave, Lydia's hand tucked into the crook of Maxwell's arm, her head tilted toward him in a gesture of intimacy. They looked like the perfect couple, successful, attractive, devoted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a carefully constructed illusion. After the last guest departed and the catering staff finished clearing up, I finally allowed myself to address what had happened. Making sure Mrs. Pembroke had retired to her quarters for the night, I returned to the garden and retrieved the wine glass from its hiding place behind the flower arrangement. The crystal glass still contained the deep red wine, now room temperature. I held it up to one of the remaining garden lights. Examining it carefully, it looked normal. No unusual residue or discoloration that I could detect. Whatever Lydia had added was either colorless or had dissolved completely. I carefully carried the glass to my private study and locked the door behind me. This room had always been my sanctuary, filled with books and mementos from a lifetime of work and travel. Edward's portrait hung above the fireplace, his kind eyes seeming to watch over me as I set the glass down on my desk. Next to the portrait was a framed photograph of Maxwell's graduation from business school, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. It was hard to reconcile the loving son in that photograph with a man who might have married someone who wished me harm. I sat down heavily in my leather chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 71 years. What was I doing? Was I really suspecting my daughter-in-law of attempting to poison me? It seemed melodramatic, the stuff of mystery novels rather than real life, but I hadn't imagined what I'd seen. Lydia had definitely put something in my wine when she thought no one was looking. I remembered something Edward used to say to me during difficult business negotiations. Trust your instincts, Lorelei. They've never steered you wrong before. My instincts were screaming at me now, and I wouldn't ignore them. With renewed determination, I opened my laptop and pulled up the security system interface. When we had renovated the house 3 years ago, I had insisted on installing a comprehensive security system, including discrete cameras covering the grounds and main rooms of the house. Most guests never noticed them, tucked away as they were in architectural details or disguised as part of the lighting system. I navigated to the footage from earlier that evening, focusing on the time around my speech. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it clearly showed the drinks table and Lydia approaching it. I leaned closer, watching intently as she glanced around, then reached into her clutch. The movement was quick, but unmistakable. She removed something small, perhaps a vial or packet, and tipped its contents into a glass on the table. My glass. I watched the footage several times, each viewing confirming what I had seen with my own eyes at the party. This wasn't imagination or paranoia. Lydia had deliberately tampered with my drink, but I still didn't know what she had put in it or why. To find that out, I would need to have the wine tested, and for that, I would need help from someone I could trust absolutely. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I rarely used anymore. Victor, it's Lorelei Thornfield. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need your help with something unusual. Victor Reynolds had been my head of security at the company for 15 years before retiring 2 years ago. He was discreet, thorough, and most importantly, loyal to me. Mrs. Thornfield. His deep voice rumbled through the phone, instantly familiar and reassuring. Not a problem at all. What can I do for you? I need something analyzed, quickly and quietly. No questions asked. Can you help with that? There was a brief pause. I still have some contacts at the private lab in the city. They're trustworthy and discreet. Perfect. Can you come by tomorrow morning? I'll be there at 8. After hanging up, I carefully sealed the wine glass in a plastic bag I found in my desk drawer. It wasn't proper evidence collection protocol, but it would have to do. I spent a restless night, my mind cycling through possible explanations for Lydia's behavior. Was she after my money? Did she see me as an obstacle to something she wanted? Or was there something deeper, something I was missing entirely? By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I needed answers, and I wouldn't rest until I had them. Victor arrived promptly at 8 a.m., just as promised. Despite being in his mid-60s, he still carried himself with the alertness and precision that had made him an excellent security chief. I welcomed him into my study, grateful that Mrs. Pembroke was busy in another part of the house. "Thank you for coming, Victor," I said, closing the door behind us. "Of course, Mrs. Thornfield." His gaze fell on the plastic bag containing the wine glass sitting on my desk. Is that what you need analyzed? I nodded, then briefly explained what I had witnessed the night before, showing him the security footage as evidence. Victor watched the video with narrowed eyes, his expression growing increasingly grave. When it ended, he looked up at me. You were right to call me. This is concerning, to say the least. What do you think she put in it? I asked. Impossible to say without testing, he replied, carefully picking up the bagged glass. It could be anything from a harmless prank to something far more sinister, but given the secretive manner in which it was done, I'm inclined to suspect the latter. How soon can you get it tested? I'll take it to my contact immediately. We should have preliminary results by this afternoon. Comprehensive ones within 24 hours. I handed him an envelope containing cash. For expenses, and please ensure your contact understands the need for absolute discretion. Victor nodded, tucking the envelope into his jacket pocket. I'll call you as soon as I have any information. After he left, I tried to occupy myself with ordinary tasks, responding to emails, reviewing the final paperwork from the company sale, organizing my calendar for the coming month. But my mind kept returning to Lydia and her mysterious actions. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Maxwell. Mom, just checking in. How are you feeling after the big night? I forced lightness into my voice. A bit tired, but happy. It was a wonderful celebration. It really was. There was genuine warmth in his voice. Listen, Lydia and I were wondering if you'd like to join us for dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just the three of us. My heart rate quickened. The last thing I wanted was to sit across from Lydia, pretending everything was normal when I knew she had tried to drug me. But declining might raise suspicions. That sounds lovely, I heard myself say. What time should I come over? How about 7? Lydia's making her famous lasagna. Perfect. I'll bring dessert. After hanging up, I paced my study, second-guessing my decision. Was it wise to go to their house before I knew what Lydia had put in my wine? But staying away might alert her to the fact that I was onto her. No, better to maintain the pretense of normalcy while I gathered more information. At 3 p.m., Victor called back. Mrs. Thornfield, I have preliminary results, he said, his voice tense. The lab found traces of a powerful sedative in the wine, one that would have caused extreme drowsiness and potentially unconsciousness, especially when combined with alcohol. I felt a chill run down my spine. A sedative, not a poison, not a lethal one, no, but enough to render you completely helpless for several hours. And there's something else. He paused. My contact was curious about the substance, so he ran it through a broader database. It's a specific formulation that's been linked to several cases in the last few years. Cases where elderly wealthy individuals were drugged and then robbed or coerced into signing over assets. My mind raced with the implications. So this wasn't an attempted murder, but rather a potential theft or fraud, it seems, Victor finished. Mrs. Thornfield, there's one more thing you should know. I took the liberty of running a background check on your daughter-in-law. I gripped the phone tighter, and the woman known as Lydia Thornfield has quite a colorful past. Her real name appears to be Natasha Kovich. She's wanted for questioning in connection with at least 3 cases in Europe involving elderly victims who were defrauded of significant sums. She's skilled at changing identities and has operated under at least 4 different names that we know of. I sank into my chair, feeling as if the air had been knocked from my lungs. Are you absolutely certain? The facial recognition match is 98%. I've sent the file to your secure email. After ending the call, I opened my email with trembling hands. The file Victor had sent contained several photographs of a woman who was undeniably Lydia, though with different hair colors and styles, alongside various identity documents bearing different names. There were also police reports from Prague, Vienna, and Geneva, all describing similar schemes. A charming younger woman who ingratiated herself with wealthy older individuals before drugging them and stealing their assets. The most recent case had been just 6 years ago in Prague, around the time Maxwell had met Lydia, during his business trip. It wasn't a coincidence. My son hadn't randomly met and fallen in love with a con artist. He had been targeted, and through him, so had I. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what this meant. My daughter-in-law was a criminal, a con artist who had married my son as part of a long game to get to my money, and now that I had sold my company for millions, she had made her move. But what about Maxwell? Was he an unwitting pawn in her scheme? Truly in love with a woman who had been lying to him from the start? Or was it possible that he was somehow involved? The thought made my stomach turn. No, I couldn't believe that. Maxwell might have his flaws, but he was Edward's son through and through. Honest, principled, incapable of such deception. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 5 p.m. In 2 hours, I was expected at their house for dinner. I needed to decide what to do with this explosive information. Going to the police seemed like the obvious choice. But what evidence did I really have? Yes, Lydia had put something in my wine, but I had no proof of her intent, and revealing her true identity would devastate Maxwell, potentially destroying our relationship if he didn't believe me. No, I needed to be strategic about this, just as I had been in business all these years. I needed more information, and possibly a confession, before I made my next move. With new resolve, I stood up and went to prepare for dinner, my mind formulating a plan that would protect both my assets and my son from the predator in our midst. I arrived at Maxwell and Lydia's elegant townhouse at precisely 7 p.m., a box from the local bakery in hand. Despite the turmoil inside me, I had taken extra care with my appearance. A silk blouse in my signature cobalt blue, pearl earrings that had been a gift from Edward, light makeup that accentuated rather than masked my age. I wanted to project confidence and normalcy. Maxwell opened the door, greeting me with a warm hug. "Mom, you look wonderful." "Come in." Their home was tastefully decorated, a blend of modern aesthetics and antique pieces I recognized from my own collection, items I had given them as wedding gifts, not realizing they were going to a woman who specialized in stealing from people just like me. Lydia emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron, the picture of domestic harmony. "Lorelei, so glad you could join us." She approached to kiss my cheek, and it took every ounce of self-control not to flinch away from her touch. "I wouldn't miss Lydia's famous lasagna," I replied with a smile that I hoped didn't reveal my knowledge. I handed the bakery box to Maxwell. "Chocolate mousse cake for dessert." "Your favorite," Maxwell exclaimed, peering into the box. "And conveniently, mine too," I said, allowing a genuine moment of connection with my son. We moved to the living room for pre-dinner drinks. Maxwell busied himself at the bar cart, while Lydia and I settled on opposite ends of the sofa. "You must be relieved to have the sale finalized," Lydia commented. "Such a weight off your shoulders." "It is," I agreed, though I imagine the real adjustment is yet to come. "After all those years of having a purpose, a place to go every day. But now you're free," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Free to travel, to enjoy your wealth, no responsibilities, no one depending on you." I noticed the emphasis she placed on wealth and no one depending on you. Was she already planning how to separate me from my money? Maxwell returned with drinks, scotch for himself, white wine for Lydia and me. I accepted the glass but was careful to only pretend to sip from it. After yesterday's incident, I wasn't taking any chances. "Actually," I said, setting my glass down, "I've been thinking about what's next. About my legacy." Lydia's eyes sharpened with interest. "Oh, what sort of legacy?" "Well, the money, of course. 21 million is a substantial sum. Too much for one person to spend in a lifetime, especially at my age." Maxwell looked uncomfortable. "Mom, you don't need to think about that yet. You're in excellent health." I patted his hand. "It's practical to plan ahead, dear. In fact, I've been in touch with my attorneys this morning. I'm considering setting up a foundation." "A foundation?" Lydia's voice was neutral, but I caught the flash of concern in her eyes. "Yes, to support research in women's health. Something meaningful that will continue long after I'm gone." I picked up my wine glass again, watching Lydia over the rim. "Of course, I'll make provisions for you and Maxwell as well, but the bulk of it would go to the foundation." "That sounds admirable," Lydia said, her smile strained. "But as Maxwell said, you have plenty of time to enjoy your wealth yourself first." "Perhaps," I conceded, "but I sleep better, knowing everything is arranged properly. In fact, I'm meeting with the attorneys tomorrow to sign the preliminary paperwork." This was a lie, but I wanted to see how she would react. I wasn't disappointed. Tomorrow." Lydia's composure slipped for just an instant. "That seems rather rushed. Shouldn't you take some time to think it through?" "I've been thinking about it for months, actually. Ever since the sales negotiations began." Another lie, but delivered with the confidence that had served me well in countless boardrooms. Lydia exchanged a quick glance with Maxwell. who seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of our conversation. "Well, it's your money," she said finally. "You should do what makes you happy. Dinner's probably ready," Maxwell interjected, clearly eager to change the subject. "Let me check the oven." As he left for the kitchen, an awkward silence fell between Lydia and me. I maintained my pleasant expression, but inside I was calculating my next move. I had rattled her with talk of the foundation, but I needed to push further if I wanted to expose her true nature. "You know," I said conversationally, "I've been having the strangest memory lapses lately." Lydia tilted her head, her expression one of polite concern. "Oh, yes, just little things. Where I put my keys, appointments I've made. My doctor says it's normal aging, but..." I let my voice trail off, watching her reaction carefully. "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about," she said, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. Memory problems would make me an even more perfect target for her schemes. "Probably not," I agreed, "but it does make me worry about managing such a large sum on my own. Perhaps I should consider giving you and Maxwell power of attorney, just in case." The naked greed that flashed across her face was gone in an instant, replaced by an expression of humble gratitude. "That's very generous of you to consider, Lorelei, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. As you said, you're meeting with your attorneys tomorrow." "Yes, but plans can change." I leaned forward as if sharing a confidence. "Between us, I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea of a foundation, all those administrators taking their cut, all that paperwork. Perhaps a simpler solution would be better, such as..." Her voice was carefully modulated, but I could hear the eagerness beneath. "Well, I could just transfer everything to you and Maxwell. You're both so good with money, and it would give me peace of mind knowing it's all taken care of." Lydia's eyes gleamed. "If that's what you truly want, we would of course be honored to help. Maxwell has always said how important it is to him that you're comfortable and cared for." "He's a good son," I agreed. "But I'm so fortunate to have both of you looking out for me." Maxwell called from the dining room, announcing that dinner was served. As Lydia rose to join him, I noticed a new energy in her movements, a barely contained excitement. She thought she had me, a confused old woman ready to hand over her fortune. Little did she know that the trap was closing around her, not me. Throughout dinner, I continued my performance as the slightly confused but well-meaning mother-in-law, dropping hints about my supposed memory issues and my desire to simplify my financial affairs. Lydia responded with increasingly solicitous concern, suggesting that she could accompany me to my meeting with the attorneys the next day, just to make sure everything is in order. Maxwell, to my relief, seemed puzzled by this exchange, rather than complicit in it. He repeatedly tried to steer the conversation toward less fraught topics: my plans for travel, a book he thought I might enjoy, the latest antics of his colleagues at work. His genuine concern for my well-being, unmarred by any hint of avarice, confirmed my belief that he was an unwitting participant in Lydia's scheme. As we finished our dessert, the chocolate mousse cake that had indeed always been a favorite shared indulgence between Maxwell and me, Lydia excused herself briefly to take a phone call. "Is everything all right, Mom?" Maxwell asked once we were alone. "You seem, I don't know, not quite yourself tonight." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm fine, dear. Just processing a lot of changes all at once. About what you were saying earlier, the power of attorney and all that." He looked uncomfortable. "You know you don't need to worry about any of that yet, right? And if you ever did need help, I'd make sure you were taken care of without any legal maneuvers." "I know you would," I said softly, seeing so much of Edward in his earnest expression. "You've always been a wonderful son." He blushed slightly at the praise. "I just want you to be happy, Mom. After everything you've done for me, you deserve that." Lydia returned before I could respond, her phone clutched in her hand and an odd expression on her face. "Everything okay?" Maxwell asked her. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just a work issue. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." But I had seen the look in her eyes, a mixture of excitement and calculation. Whatever that call had been about, it wasn't work-related. As the evening drew to a close, Lydia's attentiveness increased exponentially. She insisted on getting my coat for me, on Maxwell walking me all the way to my car, on making plans for us to have lunch later in the week. To anyone observing, she would have appeared to be the most devoted daughter-in-law imaginable. "Drive safely, Lorelei," she said, as I prepared to leave, her hand on my arm. "And do call us when you get home, just so we know you've arrived safely." "I will," I promised, wondering if she was hoping I wouldn't make it home at all. As Maxwell walked me to my car, I was seized by a sudden impulse to tell him everything. About the drugged wine, about Lydia's true identity, about the danger I believed he was in. But looking at his open, trusting face, I couldn't bring myself to shatter his world without irrefutable proof. He loved this woman, or at least the persona she had created for him. I needed to be absolutely certain before I took that away from him. "Maxwell," I said instead, as we reached my car. "You know how much I love you, don't you?" He looked surprised by the sudden emotion in my voice. "Of course, Mom. I love you too. And you know you can always come to me, no matter what. That nothing could ever change how I feel about you." Now he looked concerned. "What's this about, Mom? Are you sure you're okay?" I smiled reassuringly. "Just a sentimental old woman taking stock of what really matters. Go back inside before Lydia thinks I've kidnapped you." He laughed, kissed my cheek, and waited as I got into my car. I watched him in the rearview mirror as I drove away, standing on the sidewalk until I turned the corner. My beautiful son, so trusting, so unaware of the viper he had welcomed into his bed. When I arrived home, I dutifully called to let them know I had arrived safely, speaking briefly with Maxwell. Then I called Victor. "I need a complete background check on my son," I told him without preamble. "Bank records, travel history, phone records, everything you can get legally. I need to know if he's involved in this." Victor was silent for a moment. "You think your son might be complicit? I pray he isn't," I said honestly. "But I need to be sure before I move forward." "I understand. I'll get on it first thing in the morning." After hanging up, I sat in my study, staring at Edward's portrait above the fireplace. "What would you do?" I asked the silent image of my late husband. "How would you protect our son?" Edward had always been the moral compass in our relationship, tempering my more ruthless business instincts with his innate sense of right and wrong. I knew what he would say now, that the truth, however painful, was always better than deception, that Maxwell deserved to know who he had married, even if it broke his heart. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of Lydia's plan, and for that, I needed to play along a little longer, to let her believe her scheme was working. I spent the next hour composing a detailed account of everything that had happened and everything I had learned, encrypting the document and sending copies to both Victor and my most trusted attorney with instructions to open it only if something happened to me. It felt melodramatic, but I had not built a successful company by underestimating threats or failing to have contingency plans. As I finally prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Emergency meeting called for tomorrow, 9 a.m. Same fee as discussed. Address to follow. Bring the old lady's financial details. Plan is accelerating." I stared at the message in confusion, before realizing it must have been sent to me by mistake. Someone had misdialed or entered the wrong number, but the content made my blood run cold. The old lady's financial details, Plan is accelerating, Aho. It could be completely unrelated to my situation, of course, but coming on the heels of everything else, it felt ominous. I forwarded the message to Victor with a brief note asking him to trace it if possible, then tried to get some sleep, but rest eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lydia's hand hovering over my wine glass, her secretive smile, the calculated look in her eyes when I mentioned my fortune. I saw Maxwell's trusting face, so unaware of the danger surrounding him. By morning, I had made up my mind. I would no longer wait for Lydia to make her move. It was time to take control of the situation and expose the truth, whatever the cost. Victor called early the next morning, with news that only confirmed my worst fears. "The text message you received was meant for someone named Marcus Devlin, a private investigator with a questionable reputation," he told me. "The sender was using a burner phone, but the location data places it within half a mile of your son's residence at the time it was sent. So Lydia sent it," I concluded, a chill settling in my bones despite the warm morning sun streaming through my study windows. "It appears so," Victor confirmed. "And there's more. I've completed the preliminary background check on your son, Mrs. Thornfield. As far as I can tell, he's completely clean. His finances show no unusual activity, no unexplained deposits or withdrawals. His travel history matches what would be expected for his job. His phone records show nothing suspicious. I felt a profound relief wash over me. Maxwell wasn't involved. He was a victim, just as I was. Perhaps even more so, because he had given his heart to this woman. Well, what about the Marcus Devlin mentioned in the text? I asked. He's a PI who's been investigated several times for unethical practices, including illegal surveillance and intimidation. He's never been convicted, but his reputation in the industry is problematic, and he's meeting with Lydia today at 9 a.m. It seems that way. Yes. I glanced at my watch. It was just after 7 a.m. I need to know what they're planning, Victor. I need concrete evidence before I confront Maxwell with this. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Mrs. Thornfield, what you're suggesting could be dangerous. This woman has already attempted to drug you once. I'm aware of the risks, I said firmly, but I won't let her hurt my son any more than she already has. Can you help me or not? Victor sighed, a sound of resignation rather than reluctance. I can help, but we do this my way, with proper precautions. Agreed. We quickly formulated a plan. Victor would trace the location of the meeting using the cell phone data from the text message. He would go in first to set up surveillance, and I would join him only when it was safe to do so. Our goal was simple: record Lydia's conversation with Devlin to obtain evidence of her true identity and intentions. By 8:30 a.m., I was sitting in Victor's nondescript sedan a block away from a small coffee shop in a part of town I rarely visited. Through a pair of binoculars, I could see Lydia already seated at an outdoor table, checking her watch impatiently. She's alone for now, Victor murmured beside me. And my associate has set up audio surveillance at the neighboring table. We should be able to hear everything. Sure enough, a tinny voice came through the small speaker Victor had placed on the dashboard, Lydia ordering another coffee, her tone curt with the waiter. At precisely 9 a.m., a man approached her table, tall, broad-shouldered, with the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to looking over his shoulder. Marcus Devlin, presumably. You're late, Lydia's voice came through the speaker. Traffic, the man replied tersely, taking a seat across from her. You have the information. Lydia slid a folder across the table. Everything you need to know about Lorelei Thornfield's finances, bank accounts, investment portfolios, property holdings. And you're sure she's planning to set up this foundation tomorrow? That's what she told us last night. Once those papers are signed, getting to the money becomes much more complicated. Devlin opened the folder, scanning its contents. 21 million. Nice payday. It's more than just the sale proceeds, Lydia said, leaning forward eagerly. She has other investments, property, all told, closer to 30 million. My stomach tightened at hearing my life reduced to a dollar figure, a payday for criminals. And the plan? Devlin asked. Remains the same, just accelerated. You create a distraction at her attorney's office tomorrow morning. I convince Lorelei to let me drive her to a different location. For her safety, of course. Once I have her alone, Lydia's voice trailed off suggestively. And you're confident you can get her to sign everything over? Lydia laughed, a cold sound that bore no resemblance to the warm chuckle she used around Maxwell. She practically offered it to me last night, kept talking about her memory problems, how she wants to simplify her finances. The old fool trusts me completely. I felt a surge of anger at her dismissive tone, but also a grim satisfaction. My performance had been convincing. And your husband? Devlin asked. Still in the dark? Maxwell, Lydia scoffed. He's as gullible as his mother, thinks I'm the perfect, devoted wife. 5 years I've been playing that role, waiting for the big score. She leaned closer to Devlin. Once we have the money, I'll disappear. New identity, new life. Maxwell can spend the rest of his life wondering what happened to his precious wife. The casual cruelty in her voice as she discussed abandoning my son made my hands clench into fists. 5 years of marriage, all a calculated lie. What about the son finding her afterward? He'll be suspicious, Devlin pointed out. By the time he finds her, she'll be in no condition to communicate anything clearly, Lydia replied. The same sedative I tried to use at the party, but a much stronger dose. It won't kill her, but it will leave her compromised. Doctors will attribute it to a stroke or dementia. Very sad, very natural for a woman her age. I felt sick listening to her calmly discuss drugging me into a state of permanent incapacitation. Beside me, Victor's face had hardened into a mask of controlled fury. We have enough, he said quietly. More than enough to take to the police. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment, as I processed the full extent of Lydia's betrayal and the danger she posed. On the speaker, the conversation continued, with Devlin and Lydia discussing the logistics of their plan, how to create a convincing distraction, where Lydia would take me, how they would handle the transfer of funds once I had signed the necessary documents. "And if she resists?" Devlin asked at one point. "She won't," Lydia said confidently. "But if she does, well, accidents happen to elderly people all the time." Falls confusion. Who would question it? That was enough. I had heard more than enough. "We're going to the police," I said to Victor, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Now." Victor nodded, starting the car, but before we could pull away, my phone rang. It was Maxwell. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, dear." "Mom." His voice was strained, worried. "Have you seen Lydia this morning?" "She said she had an early client meeting, but she's not answering her phone, and her office says she doesn't have anything scheduled." I looked through the binoculars at Lydia, still deep in conversation with Devlin, plotting my financial ruin and possibly my death. "My son's wife, the woman he loved. Maxwell," I said gently. "I need you to meet me at the police station downtown. There's something you need to know." "The police station? Mom, what's going on? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I assured him. "But please, just meet me there. I'll explain everything." After a moment of silence, he agreed. I ended the call, my heart heavy with the knowledge that I was about to shatter my son's world. But there was no alternative now. The truth had to come out. Victor drove us directly to the police station, the audio recording of Lydia's conversation with Devlin safely stored on his phone. Along the way, I called my attorney and asked him to meet us there as well. This would require legal as well as law enforcement expertise. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw Maxwell's car already there. He was pacing outside the entrance, his face etched with worry. When he spotted me emerging from Victor's sedan, he rushed over. "Mom, what's happening? Why are we at a police station?" His eyes darted to Victor, whom he vaguely knew from company events. "Mr. Reynolds, I don't understand." I took his hands in mine, looking directly into his eyes. Edward's eyes, honest and true. "Maxwell, I need you to be strong now. What I'm about to tell you is going to be painful, but I need you to listen and trust me." He nodded slowly, confusion and fear warring in his expression. "It's about Lydia," I began, and watched as my son's world began to crumble before my eyes. The next few hours were among the most difficult of my life. Sitting in a sterile interview room at the police station, I watched as Maxwell's initial disbelief gave way to anger, then to a devastating grief as the evidence mounted against the woman he had loved and trusted for 5 years. The police detective assigned to our case, a competent woman named Detective Reeves, listened to the audio recording with grim attention, occasionally making notes. My attorney, James Harrison, sat beside me, his presence reassuring as we navigated the complex legal terrain of filing charges against Lydia. "So this woman, who has been living as Lydia Thornfield, is actually Natasha Kovich, wanted in connection with similar schemes in Europe," Detective Reeves clarified, looking up from her notes. "That's correct," Victor confirmed, pulling up the file he had compiled. "Facial recognition confirms it with 98% certainty." Maxwell sat with his head in his hands, having not spoken for several minutes. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed but resolute. "I want to help," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Whatever you need to catch her, I'll do it." Detective Reeves regarded him thoughtfully. "Mr. Thornfield, I understand this is deeply personal for you, but she used me," Maxwell interrupted, a new hardness in his voice that I had never heard before. "For 5 years, she used me to get close to my mother, to set up this con. I want to be part of stopping her." The detective exchanged glances with my attorney, who gave a slight nod. "Actually," Detective Reeves said slowly, "having your cooperation could be very helpful. We need to apprehend Ms. Kovich without tipping her off that we're onto her. If you were to act normally around her, you want me to pretend everything is fine?" Maxwell looked incredulous. "After what I just heard? Just until we can set up a proper operation to arrest her," the detective explained. "A few hours at most." I reached for Maxwell's hand. "You don't have to do this," I told him. "We can find another way." He squeezed my hand, then straightened his shoulders. No, I'll do it. I want to see her face when she realizes the game is up. With Maxwell's agreement, a plan was quickly formulated. He would return home as if nothing was amiss, while the police prepared to move in. He would wear a wire to record any incriminating statements Lydia might make. The goal was to get her to reveal her plans explicitly, providing even more evidence for the eventual prosecution. As the details were being finalized, Maxwell pulled me aside. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry. I brought her into our lives. I never suspected." "Of course you didn't," I said firmly. "She's a professional con artist, Maxwell. She's done this before. This isn't your fault. But all those times she insisted on handling our finances, or when she suggested you might want to consider moving to a retirement community, I thought she was just being practical." He shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. "I was completely blind. Love does that," I said gently. "It makes us see what we want to see." He looked at me with new understanding. "Is that why you didn't tell me right away? Why you investigated on your own first?" "I needed to be sure," I admitted. "And I wanted to protect you from this pain, if I could." Maxwell embraced me then, holding on tightly as if I might disappear. "I should have been protecting you," he murmured against my hair. "We protect each other," I corrected him. "That's what family does." By early afternoon, everything was in place. Maxwell, now wearing a concealed recording device, prepared to return home. The plan was simple. He would tell Lydia that I had called, upset about some confusion with my attorney, and that he was concerned about my mental state. This would play into her narrative of my supposed memory problems and might encourage her to reveal more of her plans. "Be careful," I urged him as he prepared to leave. "If you feel unsafe at any point." "I'll be fine, Mom," he assured me, though I could see the strain in his eyes. "The police will be right outside." I watched him go with a heavy heart, knowing that he was facing one of the most difficult challenges of his life, confronting the woman he loved as a fraud and a criminal. Detective Reeves placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I will take good care of him, Mrs. Thornfield, and we'll get her." "I know you will," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. The next 2 hours were excruciating. I remained at the police station with Victor and my attorney, waiting for news. We could hear fragments of Maxwell's conversation with Lydia through the monitoring equipment, but the audio was spotty and incomplete. Mother called, very confused, meeting with attorneys. Maxwell's voice came through. "Perfect timing, can help her, simplify everything." Lydia's response, her tone solicitous, but with an undercurrent of excitement that was obvious now that I knew what to listen for. Then, suddenly, a commotion on the line. Raised voices, something crashing. "Police, don't move." A male voice, authoritative. "What is this?" "Maxwell, what's happening?" Lydia, her voice higher, panicked. "It's over, Natasha." Maxwell's voice, steady and cold. "We know everything." A scream of rage, more crashing sounds, then silence. Detective Reeves. Radio crackled to life. "Suspect in custody. All clear." I sagged with relief. Victor's steadying hand on my elbow, the only thing keeping me upright. It was over. Lydia, or rather, Natasha, had been caught, and Maxwell was safe. An hour later, I was allowed to see my son. He sat alone in a small waiting area, staring at nothing, a paper cup of untouched coffee in his hands. When he saw me, he stood, and I was struck by how much older he suddenly looked, as if the events of the day had aged him years. "She tried to run," he said without preamble. When she realized what was happening, she grabbed her go-bag, apparently she's had one packed and ready all along, and tried to get past me to the door. The police had to physically restrain her. I sat beside him, not knowing what to say. What comfort could I possibly offer for this level of betrayal? She kept screaming that I was an idiot, that I never suspected anything. Maxwell continued, his voice flat. 5 years of marriage, and she was right. I never had a clue who she really was. None of us did, I reminded him gently. "You did," he pointed out. "You figured it out. Only because I caught her in the act," I said. "And even then, I wasn't sure at first. I thought I might be paranoid or overreacting." Maxwell was quiet for a long moment. They found passport and IDs in her bag. Different names, different looks. Detective Reeves says she was probably planning to disappear even if this scheme didn't work out. He looked at me, his expression haunted. Our entire marriage was a lie. Mom. Every moment. Every memory. All fabricated by her to get to you. I took his hand in mine, feeling its slight tremor. Not every moment, I said firmly. You loved her truly, Maxwell. That was real, even if her response wasn't. Don't let her take that from you, too. He shook his head, unconvinced, but he didn't pull his hand away. We sat like that for some time, mother and son, united in our grief over different types of loss, his of a love and a future, mine of the security and peace I had hoped retirement would bring. What happens now? He finally asked. Now, I said, squeezing his hand. We begin again. Together. The weeks following Natasha's arrest were a blur of police interviews, legal consultations, and emotional upheaval. The woman who had been living as Lydia Thornfield was charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, with additional charges pending as authorities in Europe became involved in the case. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Beyond the recorded conversation with Devlin and the false identifications found in her possession, police discovered detailed records of her previous cons in a secure cloud account. She had been meticulous in documenting her successes, perhaps as a twisted form of professional pride. Most devastating for Maxwell was the discovery of a journal in which she had chronicled her conquest of him, how she had researched his preferences and habits before their chance meeting in Prague, how she had manipulated his emotions, how she had systematically worked to isolate him from friends who might have seen through her facade. I need to see it, he insisted when Detective Reeves mentioned the journal's existence. Maxwell, no, I protested. It will only cause you more pain. But he was adamant. I need to understand, Mom. I need to know how she did this, how I was so completely fooled. In the end, he was allowed to read portions of the journal under supervision. He emerged from that reading session visibly shaken, but somehow more resolved, as if seeing the cold calculation behind Natasha's actions had helped him begin to process the betrayal. She never loved me, he said simply when I asked what he had learned, not for a single moment. The revelation seemed to free something in him. The tormenting question of whether there had been any genuine feeling on her part had been answered definitively. Now he could begin to move forward. For my part, I was dealing with my own complex emotions. Relief that the threat had been neutralized. Anger at having been targeted. Guilt over the pain Maxwell was experiencing. And beneath it all, a nagging sense of vulnerability that I had never felt before, not even after Edward's death. I had always prided myself on my independence, my self-sufficiency. Now I found myself checking the locks on my doors multiple times before bed, starting at unexpected noises, looking over my shoulder in public places. The knowledge that I had been marked as a target, that my age had made me appear vulnerable to predators like Natasha, had shaken my sense of security in a profound way. Victor, perhaps sensing this, took it upon himself to upgrade the security systems at my home and to check in on me regularly. His steady presence was a comfort, though I was careful not to become dependent on it. You know, he said one evening as we reviewed some additional security measures he was recommending, you handled this situation with remarkable composure and intelligence. Most people would have panicked or confronted her immediately. I've had practice keeping my cool in difficult situations, I replied with a small smile. Decades of boardroom battles teach you to think strategically rather than reactively. Still, he insisted, it was impressive. You outmaneuvered a professional con artist at her own game. His words warmed me, helping to restore some of the confidence that had been shaken by the ordeal. Yes, I had been targeted, but I had also fought back effectively. I was not merely a vulnerable old woman. I was still Lorelei Thornfield, a force to be reckoned with. As the criminal case against Natasha proceeded, Maxwell faced the painful process of dissolving his marriage. The legal aspects were straightforward given the circumstances, but the emotional aftermath was more complicated. 5 years of his life had been built on a foundation of lies. Now he had to decide what to salvage and what to discard from that period. He threw himself into work initially, taking on additional clients and extending his hours until I worried about his health. When I expressed my concern, he brushed it aside. I'm fine, Mom. Work helps me not think about everything else. But I could see he wasn't fine. He was losing weight, developing dark circles under his eyes, withdrawing from the friends and colleagues who reached out to him. I recognized the signs of depression setting in, and knew I needed to intervene before he isolated himself completely. One Sunday morning, about a month after Natasha's arrest, I arrived unannounced at his townhouse with a basket of breakfast pastries and a firm resolve. "Get dressed," I told him when he opened the door, still in his pajamas despite the late morning hour. "We're going out." "Mom, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not really up for—" "It wasn't a suggestion, Maxwell," I said, using the tone that had served me well as CEO. "Shower, dress, and be downstairs in 20 minutes. The pastries will still be warm." To my relief, he complied, appearing downstairs in clean clothes with damp hair, looking slightly more alive than when he had opened the door. I drove us to a small private airfield outside the city, where a helicopter was waiting. "What is this?" Maxwell asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his apathy for the first time in weeks. "This," I said, gesturing to the helicopter, "is the beginning of your retirement gift to me, which circumstances prevented you from giving earlier." His brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand." "You were planning to give me flying lessons," I explained. "I found the brochure in your desk when I was looking for a pen during one of our dinner parties. You'd made notes about scheduling them for after the company sale was complete. You weren't supposed to find that," he said, a ghost of a smile flickering across his face. "It was meant to be a surprise." "Well, consider me surprised," I replied lightly. "And now we're going to take that first lesson together. Mom, you don't have to do this. I want to." I took his hand. "Maxwell, we both need to remember that there's still joy to be found in life, still new experiences to be had. We can't let what happened define our future." He looked at the helicopter, then back at me, indecision written across his features. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The flying lesson was exhilarating, terrifying at moments, but ultimately freeing in a way I hadn't anticipated. Soaring above the city, seeing my world from a completely new perspective, I felt a sense of possibility return. Beside me, I saw Maxwell's face relax into genuine enjoyment for the first time since the arrest. That helicopter ride became the first of many shared experiences as we worked to rebuild our lives. Sometimes Victor joined us, his calm presence a stabilizing force for both Maxwell and me. Sometimes we invited other friends or colleagues, gradually expanding our circle of trust again. Natasha's trial was scheduled for the following spring, almost a year after her arrest. Maxwell and I would both be called to testify, a prospect that filled me with dread, not for myself, but for my son. Having to publicly recount how he had been manipulated and betrayed would be painful for him. "Or I can handle it," he assured me when I expressed my concerns. "I've had time to process what happened. I'm stronger now." And he was. The months since Natasha's arrest had been difficult, but Maxwell had gradually emerged from his depression with the help of therapy, supportive friends, and our strengthened relationship. He was still more serious than before, more cautious in his interactions with new people, but he was functioning, even occasionally laughing again. As for me, I had finally begun to enjoy my retirement in the ways I had originally planned. I traveled, sometimes with Maxwell, sometimes with friends, occasionally alone. I read voraciously, joined a book club, took up watercolor painting. I even started mentoring young women entrepreneurs, finding unexpected fulfillment in sharing the knowledge and experience I had gained over my career. The sense of vulnerability that had plagued me after Natasha's arrest gradually faded, though it never disappeared entirely. I had learned a valuable lesson about trust and vigilance, one that I incorporated into my life without allowing it to dominate. Victor remained a steady presence, our professional relationship evolving into a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. His practical approach to security gave me peace of mind, while my perspective on life beyond work seemed to offer him a new outlook as he contemplated his own eventual retirement. As the date of the trial approached, I found myself reflecting on all that had happened and all that had changed. The path I had envisioned for my retirement had taken an unexpected and dramatic detour, but perhaps, in some ways, it had led me to a better destination than I had originally planned. I had discovered reserves of strength and resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I had deepened my relationship with my son, forging a new kind of partnership based on our shared experience. And I had learned, in the most difficult way possible, that it's never too late for life to surprise you, for better or for worse. Standing in my garden on a crisp autumn evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. I felt a profound sense of gratitude despite everything. I was still here, still strong, still moving forward. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. The day of Natasha's trial arrived with perfect spring weather that felt at odds with the gravity of what we faced. Maxwell and I arrived at the courthouse in conservative suits, our attorney, James Harrison, meeting us at the entrance. "The prosecution feels very confident," he informed us. "With the evidence we have, she's likely facing substantial prison time." When we entered the courtroom, I immediately spotted Natasha. She looked markedly different. Her hair, its natural dark brown instead of blonde, wearing a simple dress designed to convey innocence. When she saw us, her eyes flashed with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. The trial proceeded as expected. The prosecution presented its case methodically. The recorded conversation with Devlin, the false identifications, her journal documenting the manipulation of Maxwell. I testified about discovering her tampering with my wine, remaining composed despite the defense attorney's attempts to suggest I had misinterpreted what I'd seen. Maxwell's testimony was more difficult. He had to publicly detail their relationship and the gradual signs of manipulation he now recognized. Throughout, Natasha watched him with an expression of hurt betrayal that might have been convincing if we hadn't known the truth. When Natasha took the stand, she wove an alternative narrative. She was Lydia, not Natasha Kovich. She had changed her name to escape legal troubles in Europe that were merely misunderstandings. She had genuinely loved Maxwell and had only been adding a vitamin supplement to my wine out of concern for my health. Her performance was masterful, but the evidence was too substantial. The prosecution dismantled her claims, highlighting the detailed planning documented in her own journal. After 3 days, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just under 5 hours before delivering guilty verdicts on all major charges. The judge denied bail pending sentencing. As Natasha was led away, she turned once to look directly at Maxwell, her mask slipping to reveal raw hatred before she was escorted out. That evening, Maxwell came to my house for dinner. As we sat in my garden afterward, he seemed lost in thought. "I was thinking about trust," he finally said. "About how difficult it's going to be to ever fully trust someone again. Don't let her take that from you permanently," I advised gently. "It's like healing from any injury. At first, it seems impossible that you'll ever be whole again. But gradually, with time and care, you heal. Not to exactly what you were before, there will be scars, but to something new that can still function, still experience joy." Natasha received a 15-year sentence with no possibility of parole for 10 years. The conclusion of the legal proceedings brought a sense of closure, but also left a void. For months, our lives had revolved around the case. Now we needed to truly move forward. Maxwell threw himself into rebuilding his life. He sold the townhouse he had shared with Natasha and bought a smaller place closer to me. He focused on his financial advisory practice, particularly helping elderly clients protect themselves from fraud. Turning his painful experience into something positive, I continued to embrace my retirement, dividing my time between travel, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and cultivating new friendships. Victor remained a steady presence in my life, our professional relationship evolving into something deeper as we discovered shared interests beyond security concerns. 6 months after the sentencing, I received an unexpected letter. It had been forwarded through my attorney, a precaution we maintained to keep my direct address private. The return address was the Federal Women's Prison, where Natasha was serving her sentence. "You don't have to read it," Maxwell said when I called to tell him about it. "You don't owe her anything." "I know," I replied, "but I'm curious." The letter was brief and entirely unexpected. "Mrs. Thornfield, you won. I underestimated you, something I've never done with a mark before. You should be proud of that. I won't ask for forgiveness. We both know I don't deserve it and wouldn't mean it, but I want you to know something. Maxwell never suspected anything. His love was real, even if mine wasn't. Don't waste time wondering if he was involved. He wasn't. He's a good man who deserved better than me. Natasha." I sat with the letter for a long time, uncertain how to feel about this strange communication. Was it a final manipulation? A genuine moment of honesty? Perhaps a bit of both. I decided to show it to Maxwell, who read it with an unreadable expression. "Do you believe her?" he asked after a long silence. About you not being involved. I never doubted that, I assured him. As for the rest, I think it might be the closest thing to honesty she's capable of. Maxwell nodded slowly. It's strange, but this actually helps, knowing that she acknowledges I wasn't part of it, that my feelings were real even if hers weren't. We didn't speak of the letter again, but I noticed a subtle change in Maxwell afterward, a lightness, as if some lingering doubt had been lifted. A year after the trial, Victor and I were having dinner at my favorite restaurant when he surprised me with a question. "Lorelei," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant, "I've been wondering if you might consider accompanying me to the symphony next weekend, not as a security consultation, but as a date." At 72, I hadn't expected to find myself contemplating romance again, but looking at Victor across the table, his kind eyes, his steadfast reliability, the quiet humor I'd come to appreciate, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with professional respect. "I'd like that very much," I replied, enjoying the smile that spread across his face. Maxwell was supportive when I told him about this new development. "Mom, if anyone deserves happiness, it's you," he said. "And Victor's a good man." "He is," I agreed, "but we're taking things very slowly." "Of course," Maxwell nodded. "Background checks, reference verification, polygraph tests." It took me a moment to realize he was joking. When I did, I laughed, a real, unreserved laugh that felt like healing. Epilogue. 5 years have passed since that fateful night when I caught Natasha tampering with my wine glass. At 76, I find myself in a place I never expected, contentedly sharing my life with Victor, who became my husband 3 years ago in a small ceremony with Maxwell as our witness. Maxwell has found his own path to healing. He's built a successful practice focused on financial security for seniors, drawing on our experience to help others avoid similar situations. He dates occasionally, but remains cautious, the scars of his marriage to Natasha still visible, though no longer defining him. Natasha remains in prison, having lost her appeal for early release. Sometimes I think about her letter, the only communication we've ever received from her. There was a certain respect in her acknowledgement of defeat, a recognition that in me, she had finally met her match. The experience changed us all. I became more vigilant but refused to become paranoid. Maxwell learned to balance caution with openness. We both discovered strengths we didn't know we possessed. As I sit in my garden on this warm summer evening, Victor beside me reading while Maxwell tends to the grill for our weekly family dinner, I reflect on the lessons of these past years. That age doesn't make you weak or vulnerable unless you allow it to. That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, though the architecture will be different. That family, real family, stands together through even the darkest times. The wine glass that revealed Natasha's true intentions also revealed our true strength. In trying to take advantage of what she perceived as my weakness, she instead unleashed a resilience she never anticipated. Life offers no guarantees of safety. People will disappoint, betray, and sometimes try to harm us. But in facing these challenges, we discover who we truly are. In my case, I discovered that at 71, I was still very much a force to be reckoned with, and that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson of all.